Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. Across the province of the Free State, geographers, learners that have joined us in the group, even though we are still waiting for many other colleagues to join us to this platform. Colleagues, this platform, like Nadine Puti says, is not a platform whereby Ndate Khadebe will be speaking alone, but it's all about sharing strategies on how to approach the content for term 2. So let us make sure that we are open in terms of giving the inputs when necessary, and then we share the strategies on how to go about in term 2. Because remember, colleagues, in term 2, we are going to write the examination, paper 1, paper 2. Settlement geography is part of paper 2. So that means for paper 2, we are going to write examination out of 150. We know that we have done it last year. We'll be also doing it this year. It's only going to be a settlement geography for paper 2. But for paper 1, remember, it's climatology and geomorphology. Now, colleagues, let's make sure that our learners have also exam guidelines. Just make sure your learner at your school is having exam guideline always. Let's start, colleagues. Settlement geography. We'll be looking at settlement geography, but specifically rural and urban settlement, both of them. And then obviously the definitions for settlement for a site and a situation is compulsory for you to explain them thoroughly to your learners. And then if you look at, for example, the definition for settlement, I think the easiest way to explain it, say, is a place where people live. That is the easiest way. But also there's another one that is long, and then that we can explain to our learners always, that we are using in geography in trying to make our learners understand the definition for settlement. So it says again, the settlement is a grouping of people, activities, building, and communication networks that function as a single integrated system on a regular basis. That is the long one that a learner also can be able to explain. But in most of the time when they are asking this question in a multiple choice, the learners are expected to know this one, the grouping of people, activities, buildings, and so on. That one, our learners need to know it. But the simple explanation for settlement is a place where people live. And then the second concept that might also, when you start introducing the settlement, you can also explain to your learners what is the site and also what is the situation, which is very important. So that means every time when you start with a topic, you must make sure that your learners are familiar with the concepts of that particular topic. Colleagues, we are going to deal with rural and urban settlement. Obviously, we must know the classification of settlement according to size, patterns, and also the functions. We'll be looking at that by looking at rural settlement and also urban settlement. So for the examination, obviously, your learners must know the rural settlement part and also the urban settlement part. And then on the next page, next slide, how a site, like for example, if you focus more on the settlement, on the rural settlement, how a site, the situation affect the location of rural settlement. We're looking at the classification based on the pattern. But remember, colleagues, we're having something that we call settlement hierarchy. In that particular settlement hierarchy, that's where we rank or arrange the settlements according to the size. So obviously, the smallest one, it's a isolated farmstead. So that means your learners must know that we're having isolated farmstead as the smallest one. And then the largest one at the top there, then we say it's a megalopolis, which is the big one. And classification of rural settlement according to patterns, we're only having 2 patterns here that we're going to focus on. Is a nucleated pattern and also the dispersed pattern. So that means make sure that your learners, they know advantages and disadvantages of each. Don't only focus on the patterns on its own. Normally, when I teach my learners, I say to them, my dear learners, if you go to the patterns, nucleated, when the buildings are close to each other, that simply means now a type of farming that will take place there. It's a small-scale farming, which is a subsistence farming. But then in terms of the one, which is a dispersed one, where buildings are far apart, that means there's enough space in between the buildings. That means now my learners will know that now we are going to talk about the large scale farming, which is a commercial farming. So must know advantages and then disadvantage of each. It's either it's mutilated and also dispersed. And then the functions of a settlement also must know the functions of a settlement. And also must bear in mind that we are also having different shapes in a rural settlement. We're having the round one, the linear shape, crossroad, the T-shape, stela. There are so many shapes that are being made by the buildings. Because now, let's make an example of a linear shape. In most of the time, where do we get buildings that form a line or a linear shape? That is where now, normally those buildings will be close to the road or close to the river. That's an example. If we look at a round is like a circular shape. Then in the olden times, you'll see the settlement, then people will be settling in the area whereby they surround the church or market square, so that can be able to have an access to the church or the market square. That is how it is. So make sure that your learners understand the shape of the shapes in rural settlement. And then the other part is a land use zone in a rural settlement. Most of the land in a rural area is used for farming, forestry, and conservation. And then also, obviously, most of the land, but if you look at the entirely in a rural area, most of the land is used for farming. So when we explain to our learners the land use zone, you say, what is the land used for in a rural area? The land in a rural area is used for farming, for example. So that means our learners need to understand that most of the land in the rural area is used for farming, forestry, and conservation. And then on the next slide, there are some issues that are in the rural area. So troubles and problems that rural people or rural area is facing at the moment. The first one is the issue of rural-urban migration. So that means it's very important for you to explain to your learners the process of rural-urban migration. Why people are moving away is because of push and pull factors. Just advise your learners that every time when they come across the issue, when they have been asked why people are moving away from rural to urban, just make sure that they give relevant aspect of how people are moving from rural to urban. But again, the issue of action weights when explaining the factors, we must also take it into consideration, because you can't just give a fact, not giving a qualifier. So every time they must give a fact and a qualifier in terms of the push and pull factors. Why people are moving away from rural area, what attracts people in an urban area. So that means we need to teach our learners that. The definition for rural depopulation, when people are moving away from rural area, the number decreases. So that's where now we need to make our learners aware that you need also to understand the process of rural depopulation. What will be the cause? What are the consequences of rural depopulation on people and the economy? Strategies to address rural depopulation. What are the strategies? What is a counter-urbanization? How do you bring back people to the rural area? Because people are moving away from rural area to urban areas. What are the strategies that will be implemented in a rural area so that people cannot move away from that particular area? So these are some of the things that we need to explain to our learners. Every time learners will be giving a case study that maybe illustrate the effect of rural population and strategies to address those effects. So that means we need also to do that, to explain to them or give them a case study so that they can be able to give out the effect of rural depopulation and also the strategies. always. And then the other thing is the issue of social justice issues associated with the rural settlement. So social justice is equal access, but social injustice obviously is unequal access to resources. But if you compare rural and urban, in a rural area, most of the time, we associate it as a social injustice, because now the services that we get in an urban area are not the same as the services that we get in a rural area. So that means there's no equality in terms of provision of resources. And then we need also to look at the issue of land reform. The issue of land reform, is one of the issue in a rural area. Land reform, our learners need to understand the definition for a land reform, correcting the injustice of the past regarding land ownership. So that means one needs to understand the land reform as a definition, and then after that, you also have to teach your learners to know those 3 programs of land reform. But the issue of land reform, colleagues, if you can go back a bit in the history, it's all about the land that has been taken during the times of apartheid, during the times of forceful removal of black people in their own land. So that means now, after 1994, the government came up with the land reform to recover that land that has been taken from black people during the times of apartheid, unfairly taken to black people during the times of apartheid. So by coming up with the land reform, the tribe by all means to balance the issue of sharing the land between different races in South Africa. And then we're having three programs there that learners must know: land tenure, land redistribution, and land restitution. So our learners must be able to differentiate between the 3. In between there, you must be able to differentiate between the 3: land tenure, redistribution, and also restitution. Let me just make an example. Land tenure is all about protecting the tenants. Someone who has stayed in an area for a longer period of time, maybe in that particular farm for a longer period of time. Then if you are a new owner, you can't just evict that particular person from that particular land. So you have to give him or a time maybe to check where he or she can go to stay. And then the other one is land redistribution. Is all about government buying land and then redistribute it in the form of residential or farming to people. And then restitution is all about compensating people that lost their land due to the terms of apartheid. Compensation might be in the form of money, or you get that land back. So these are some of the rural issues that we get in a rural area. And then in the same thing of land reform, I think there's some challenges that we get in the process of land reform. Just make sure that your learners also understand the concept of expropriation of the land without compensation. Because now, I think this is happening now at the moment in different areas around South Africa. Expropriation of the land without compensation. Because in terms of this one, the government wanted to unite a different race in South Africa by bringing on the issue of land reform. So these are some of the things that we get in rural area. When you treat the rural area, this is the end of the rural area, then you must be able to give your learners, explain to them these issues. Then the next page is a it's an urban settlement. The origin and development of urban settlement, urbanization of the world population. That means now one needs to understand the concept of urbanization, urban growth, urban expansion, urban sprawl, rate of urbanization, level of urbanization, and counter-urbanization. So explain to your learners, make sure that they understand. Let's make an example with the first one, urbanization. Now, the issue of urbanization is whereby there's an increase in number of people in urban area, in percentage or in the number of people in urban areas. What causes that? It's a rural urban migration, because people are migrating from rural to urban. So immediately when they migrate from rural to urban, then the number of people in an urban area, it increases. Obviously, it will bring some challenges in an urban area. So just make sure that you explain them thoroughly to your learners. How site and situation affect the location of urban settlement. So remember, when one settling in an area, by looking at the situation, we look at the site in relation to the surroundings. During the olden times, before people can settle, they were looking at the surroundings, which is maybe is water available in that particular area. So in urban areas, obviously, you look at where are the malls, where are the shops, where for example, is a school for your children. So they're looking at that. So when you settle, you look at the situation, the surroundings. And then the site, obviously, is where a settlement is situated. And then the classification, according to the functions, we're having a central place, and then we're having trade and transport towns, a break of bulk point, junction town, gateway towns. Our learners need to understand that, and specialized towns also, when you are explaining to them. These are the three classifications that one needs to know in urban settlement. And then urban settlement, also it continues the concept of urban hierarchy, central place, threshold population, sphere of influence, range of goods. That means, colleagues, in terms of this one, the central place theory, one needs to understand, especially the concepts of, for example, the concept of a threshold population, sphere of influence, and a range. Very important. Our learners need to understand, be able to differentiate between them, give them proper examples relating to the sphere of influence. Obviously, if you look at the threshold population, obviously the population that is available to support a certain business. If there's a business somewhere, then obviously you look at the number of people to support there. And then sphere of influence, you look at the area where you get your customers. Range of the maximum distance a person might be able to travel to buy goods. Maybe those goods might be in a low order or high order goods or services. So it depends also on that. Because now we can't travel a longer distance for bread, but you can travel a longer distance to buy a car or a furniture. So this is how you can be able to explain to our learners in relation to central place theory. And then the urban structure and patterns. In terms of urban structure and patterns, the most important thing here in terms of urban structure and patterns, the land use zones. If you look there, we have land use zones, which is the CBD, commercial, which is the CBD, residential, industrial, transition zones or zone of decay, and also rural urban fringe. Very important. That means you need to explain each to your learner, to your learners, that in the commercial area, what are the commercial areas? The CBD, the OBD, the type of commercial decentralization that we need to explain to our learners. Residential is divided into 3 or 4. Then there's a high, there's a low income residentially, there's a high income residentially, there's an informal settlement there. All these things you need to explain to your learners so they understand. Types of industries, we're having two types of industries here that we're going to talk about, the light one and also the heavy one. So you need to understand that, make your learners understand that the light industries, we get them anywhere. But then the heavy industries, or in most cases, we get them outside the city or a town because of maybe it must be close to the main road, or maybe because of the high rate of pollution from those industries. Zone of decay is the oldest one, the oldest part of the city. That's where they say it's a zone of decay or transition zone. That's where we have mixed functions. You can get residential here in collaboration with next to that residential area. Then we get industries, the light industries one, maybe the panel beaters, you get them there. Rural urban fringe is where the functions of rural and urban meet. It's outside the town, outside the city, obviously, or outside the town. That's where you get the golf course and others, sewage disposal, all these things, they are outside the city. So you need to explain to your learners make sure that we give them proper examples in explaining that. And then the urban structure and the patterns, factors influencing the morphology structure of the city. We're having street patterns, 3 street patterns. The first one is radial, second one is a grid, and then the last one is irregular, but irregular is divided into 2. We're having plain irregular and unplain irregular. So you need to explain to your learners and give them the proper diagrams. And then also every time when we are teaching these patterns, you need to have your topographical map, because now these things are also appearing in our topographical map always. So we need to do that when we are teaching our learners in class at the moment, because these things also they appear in our map work in question 3, for example, as an interpretation, whereby they will ask learners to interpret a certain block or identify a street pattern in a certain block. So also we need to do that. And then building density, we all know that if you compare rural and urban, the dense building density we get them, or high building density we get them in an urban areas compared to rural area, because there are so many buildings in an urban areas compared to rural area. But at the moment, we are focused on urban areas. So that means we'll be looking at how or why we're having a high densely buildings in an urban area, especially in the central the center of the town of a city. Why so many buildings there? Then we need to give reasons why we have so many buildings in that particular point. And an urban profile is when we're looking at an urban area from the side. And then reason for the shape of an urban profile, why we have in that particular shape. If you look at the buildings from the outside, and when you go inside, the buildings are going up inside there. So you have to give a reason, make sure that your learners also understand why the buildings are structured in that way. Because when you go to the central point, then the buildings are tall. Now when you go outside, obviously density starts to decrease and everything. So that is a urban profile. So we need to explain to our learners that. And then models of urban structure, you need to differentiate, because this is basically the argument of these 3 these gentlemen here. They are trying to come up with different explanation of the urban structure. The other one will say it's a multiple nuclear, and the other one will talk about modern American Western city, and then the other one is a third world city, South African city, changing urban patterns and land use in South Africa, buffer zones, and also focusing on green belt. So most of the time in our recent years, if you look at the urban structure, it is more multiple nuclear type of an urban area or urban structure as compared to any other type. So we need to explain to your learners so that we can be able to differentiate between the models of urban structures. And then urban issues. The urban issues are caused by rural-urban migration and other factors that are happening in an urban area. So you need to explain to your learners the recent urban patterns or trend in South Africa, because most of the people are flocking from rural area to urban areas. And then there are so many challenges that we get in urban area because of rural-urban migration. And then also in terms of the economy is forcing industries in urban area to produce more product, to have more production. So if they are forcing that, they will also have create some issues like pollution in an urban area. There's so many things that are happening in an urban area because of rural-urban migration. And then the other one, the rapid urbanization. The definition for rapid urbanization, the causes, the impact, social solutions like counter-urbanization. Because now what we need to do here is to encourage people to move away from urban area to rural area. But people won't just move from rural to urban in terms of counter-urbanization, but we need to prepare a rural area to have functions or services as the same or similar to those ones that are in urban areas. So that means now you need to give those factors to your learners so that they can be able to understand. One, the first issue here is pollution in the different forms. You need to explain to them, maybe for example, an air pollution is caused by different industries. One needs to explain to our learners. And then also the issue of water pollution, explain to your learner what causes the water pollution in an urban area. You need to explain that. And then the second one is urban blight. Urban blight is all about deterioration of a part of the city. So which is basically caused by lack of maintenance. Why? Especially if you look at urban blight, we get urban blight in a land use zone called zone of decay. That is where now we get urban blight, because that is an oldest part of the city where maintenance is not being made properly in that particular part. So that means we need to explain to your learners the define urban blight, and then give out the factors, what causes urban blight, and what are the strategies thereafter. That might also prevent the issue of urban blight, because urban blight is all about deterioration. What caused deterioration? It's because of a lack of maintenance of buildings. People are neglecting the buildings, all those things. Then you must be able to explain to your learners. The third one, traffic congestion. What is a traffic congestion? As a definition first. And what causes the traffic congestion? What are the strategies? What are the effects? Then you need to explain to your learners that. Lack of planning and urban sprawl. Also, you need to explain to your learners what is an urban sprawl, and then also lack of planning. Why are we talking about lack of planning in an urban area? Because now you'll find that, why are we saying lack of planning? Because we find that now the informal settlement are close to high-income residential areas. So is that a proper planning? No, it's not a proper planning. There are so many examples that we can give in relation to the urban sprawl or lack of planning. Overcrowding, which is caused by basically the migration of people from rural to urban. Because now, remember, when people are getting inside, if you look at the next one is say housing and housing shortages. So the issue of housing shortages also is caused by rural-urban migration. So when people are migrating from rural to urban, immediately when they are in an urban area, they don't have houses in which they will be able to stay on. So they are forced to stay with their relatives, friends, and then obviously it causes the issue of overcrowding. Even if in town, everywhere there will be overcrowding because of number of people that are getting inside there. And then service provision. So if the population in an urban area increases, it's going to be difficult for municipality to provide services like water, the issue of sanitation. So it's going to be difficult. So make sure that you explain to your learners, give them examples of the service provision or basic services that are provided that will be hampered by the growth or the rural urban migration or urbanization. Then must be able to give out that. Social challenges like maybe crime, they will be common in the city if then most of the people are migrating from rural to urban areas. And then the other thing, informal settlement. Like I said, in terms of the housing shortages, if people are migrating from rural to urban, the only hope or the only solution for them when they reach urban area is for them to go and settle in an informal settlement. That is the only way to be part of the city. And then that means now one needs to explain the informal settlement. That's an illegal occupation of the land. Yeah. That's a simple explanation for that, for the informal settlement. So we need to give out that. The growth of informal settlement, it always grows because of the movement of people. Issue associated with the informal settlement. What are the issues? What are the challenges then? You need to give out the challenges. There will be one, there will be crime in that particular area, unhygienic conditions because of you are just staying in an area where there's no sanitation and sewage around that particular area. So there will be some challenges. So just make sure that your learners understand the challenges that are faced by people that are staying in the informal settlement, and come up with the strategies to address the issue. So in geography, most of the time in nowadays, if a learner, make sure that your learners know the definition, know the impact, know the effect, the consequences, and then also know the strategies. Because now, most of the time in our question papers, that's how they've been asked in different question papers. And then case study from South Africa and also around the world on how to deal with the issue of the informal settlement. Urban settlement issues, again, the injustice issue in urban areas, the definition for environmental, social, and economic injustice concern on the social and economic injustice. Now, we're having air pollution, noise pollution, destruction of ecosystems. So these are the issues that are caused mainly by the industries, by people that are staying in that particular area. Because the issue of air pollution, the most contributor of the air pollution is obviously coming from the different industries, and also the noise pollution from the different industries, from the traffic that we get. The ecosystem also has been affected in most of the time. It might be on top of the land or inside our catchment or inside the river. That is where our ecosystem has been affected, because chemicals will be entering inside the rivers, or chemicals will be thrown on the environment. Economic concern, poverty, poor public transport. There's poverty, poor public transport system in South Africa. Because of people are not working, there's a shortage of employment in South Africa, and then obviously it will lead to poverty. Poor public transport system, if the number of people in an urban area increases, that means now to lead to poor public transport system. Sometimes also the lack of maintenance of the transport system itself then can lead to poor transport systems. And then social concern, unequal access to services. Obviously, like I said before, if you look at rural and urban, or if you look at the informal settlement vis-a-vis the maybe, let's compare the two. Maybe let's say high income residential and also low income residential. Services are not the same if you look at that. So that's why they're talking about unequal access to services. But the practical example is that one for rural area and urban area. In a rural area, services are not the same as the ones that are in urban areas. Access to resources, obviously, urban area will be on advantage in terms of everything. And people that are staying in towns, vis-a-vis the people that are staying in location, the resources also won't have equal access in terms of that. And then colleagues, the other thing that we need to teach our learners is the action words for assessment. Action verbs, action words for assessment, because if you look at the examination year in, year out, our learners are unable to answer questions correctly every time. Because if you look there on my the ways that I've been given then, we're having, for example, let's take explain. It says a full sentence must be provided. So every time you must teach your learners that they must give out a full sentence where possible. So when the question says account, full sentence. When the question says, for example, describe, full sentence must be provided. So we don't just give telegram answers, but we give full sentence answers, effect and a qualifier, always, especially for those questions, paragraph questions. We give effect and a qualifier. So these are the concepts that can make sure that you make them available to your learners, so that they know when they say criticize, then what is expected of them to do. When the question says distinguish, what is expected of them to do? Classify, what is expected of them to do? All these action ways, make sure that they are available for our learners to know them. Go through with them, with your learners, and then understand, especially the common ones. They go discuss, explain. Name, obviously, is only one way. List is also one way. Give is also one way. So we must make sure that we give our learners those action ways. In conclusion of the session today, colleagues, let's make sure that also we make exam guidelines available. Like I said when I started, because now our learners, when they study, they tend not to cover everything in the exam guideline, because some of them, they don't have those exam guidelines. They don't know what to study at the end. So make sure that you make that exam guideline available to our learners always.